Hello, writers. Come write with me. My name is Michaela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my channel, Write with Michaela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is Friday, which is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then send your chapter with written permission to writewithmichaela@gmail.com. I will post the email address at the end of the video. I am looking forward to reading your chapters, even if I can't read them all on the channel. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. The story is PG-13, so if you were under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. The story is also in its rough draft stage, just like the last two stories we heard. The title of this story is Elloni's Pride, and it is a 3-book series, so it has a subtitle for that book, and the subtitle is Breaking Point. So it's Elloni's Pride is the main title, and then Breaking Point is the book 1. Today we are reading the prologue out of book 1. If you would like to read along, then send to the email address as stated earlier and request a PDF of the chapter. Make sure you are specific about either City of the Ancients, Tahia, or Elloni's Pride, and which chapter. Now let's start. Elloni's Pride, Book 1, Breaking Point. This is the prologue, Rereading Prophecies. A couple hours after lunch, Kayshawn walked into the royal court with one book open in his hand and several more books tucked under his arm. He walked to the space to speak to the king, and he waited for King Daemantade to give his attention. Nothing unusual seemed to be happening, so King Daemantade gave his attention to the lowly prophet. King Daemantade actually despised prophets or anyone that could read, so he looked down his nose at the prophet standing on the floor, which was well below his throne that was on a platform 5 steps up. "Yes, what is it?" asked King Daemantade, obviously annoyed. "Why do you bother me?" "Well, sir," excuse me, said Kayshawn as he looked up from his book at the king. When I read this as a boy, there were strange words that my teacher interpreted for me." He looked down at the book and then briefly glanced back up. "Some of it is in our common tongue." He looked back down and read, "After the new king takes over the kingdom, it will be a long while before the first baby dragon that is hidden hatches. And this first baby will hatch in Shing Abset Tet Breaming Gluba." He looked up at King Daemantade. Now, I remember my teacher telling me that Gluba meant moon, and he was guessing that Brimning meant full moon. Kayshawn closed the book in his hands and retrieved the stack from under his arm. "Now, I've confirmed that those words mean full moon, and I know you send your soldiers out on the night of the full moon, but those 3 or so words before Brimning Gluba bothered me." "Well, spit it out, Kayshawn," stated King Daemantade. "We haven't all day. Tomorrow is the full moon." Yes, replied Kayshawn. "Well, it took me a while to even find such words in any book." He pulled up one off the stack and raised it up. "In this one I found numbers. In, das, tiv, fas, tempt, etc. So in means 1. In the old language you could use in for a or an also." King Daemantade rolled his hand over and over. "Get on with it. I don't want to hear all your research. 1 what?" Kayshawn glanced up. Then he closed that book and slipped it to the bottom of the stack and grabbed another one. The words Shean and Obian were in this book. He looked down to find his place. Obian, the best I can tell, means obscure and darkness or night. So I'm guessing Shean means day. King Damantade rolled his eyes as he grew impatient. Then the meaning started penetrating his being, and he grew angry. He shouted, "One day? So far you've translated one day?" Keshan became nervous, and several books flipped out of his hands. Thankfully, he still held the one he needed next, so he didn't bend down to pick up the others yet. He scrambled to turn to the correct page. Well, yes, and they go with the word obset. I finally found these words: obset, orset, niset, naniset. I haven't learned what they all mean. Orset means after, so I hope to find obset near. He flipped several more pages as he spoke. I had to read quite a bit more. He flipped more pages until finally he stopped and pointed. Ah, here it is. Obset means, as close as I can translate, it means before. He looked up at the king. King Damantade was in a full rage. His face was flush red. He stood up and shook a fist. One day before? 1 day before? And we've been going to the village the day of the full moon? You mean we could have missed the birth of a dragon? Keshan squatted down to pick up his books, but he didn't take his eyes off the king. I don't know that we've missed anything. You have soldiers watching Browser, and his symbol hasn't lit up yet. Keshan stood with his arms wrapped around his books, and he started backing out of the chamber. King Damantade motioned to his lead soldier. Commander, get some soldiers ready. You will visit the village tonight and tomorrow night. He glanced at the prophet, and then he turned back. And the night after the full moon, in case our prophet here mixed things up. Keshan nodded his head, turned around, and quickly headed out. It seemed just his luck that the king was angry with the news instead of grateful that Keshan had done all this research. He finally released his breath as he stepped out into the hall, but his heart was still racing. He knew he needed to find or help a soldier find a linker or a dragon soon. If he didn't, the king might just kill him. Keshan shook his head to himself and hurried even more down the hall. He couldn't understand why they hadn't found any linkers. It had been 9 or 10 years now since King Damantade had captured all the dragons. Surely a dragon egg wouldn't sit all that time. Then he heard several hurried footsteps behind him, so he jumped out of the way of the group of soldiers. Keshan didn't know how long it would take them to get ready to leave, or how long it would take them to get to the village, but he had waited until after the king had digested his lunch. He had not waited in the past, and the meeting went much worse. Keshan glanced over his shoulder to see if any more soldiers were coming, and a couple more groups passed him. He started walking down the hall again. This time, he was walking a little more slowly. He flipped open the book with Abset and Orset and reread the passage. He quickly found his place and once again concluded that Abset meant before. Excuse me. He put a hand on his chest and felt his breathing slow a little. It wouldn't have been good to incorrectly translate, even if the translation was in the king's favor. Jarson, Hoshman, Hector, and several other village males were in the communal shed. They were putting away their tools and counting out the harvest they gathered today. Some, of course, was set aside for the soldiers that would come tomorrow. They all wanted to say that the soldiers took too much food from them, and that their small communal garden couldn't provide enough food for them and the soldiers. But they didn't speak. They were afraid to speak. Even though the soldiers were not there and not close, the villagers were afraid to speak. They didn't think anyone would say anything, but there was no telling what someone would do on the threat of death. Most of the males would go home and not even tell their family their concerns. A child might hear a spouse talk to a spouse and then speak. After they cleaned and put away the tools, they all headed quietly to their homes. Bradley, who was Hushman's son, slipped into the house just before his father left the communal shed. So his father didn't know he hadn't gone straight home, and his mother didn't know he wasn't helping the men with the chore of taking care of the tools. Bradley had slipped away southeast. Southeast of the village, Bradley had started another garden of his own. Bradley received vibrations from some of the people around himself. Sometimes it was more of a bubbling. He couldn't explain neither the vibrations or the bubbling. But several years ago, he felt a choking in his chest when the soldiers came. That night, the soldiers killed his sister, and he vowed never to ignore those feelings again. Bradley knew the little talk and the tremendous hope that linkers existed in his village, and he hoped to help those linkers get out and away. He grew the garden for them, so they could bring food with them as they searched for their dragon. But the soldiers wouldn't miss the food they brought. This night, there was information within him that said the linkers needed to leave soon. But Bradley told himself to wait until the night after the full moon. The soldiers would have their taxes and wouldn't return for another month. That way, Bradley could get the linkers he knew out and away and be back before the soldiers returned. Bradley sighed to himself. When Hushman entered the house, Bradley looked at him. He wanted to tell his father everything, but he couldn't say anything out loud. He glanced at his mother. His parents were smart, so maybe they already knew or guessed. Okay, writers, that is the end of the prologue. It was quite short. It's only 1,455 words. But remember, a prologue is only supposed to be between 1,500 and 2,500 words on average. So 1,455 is really close. Let's think about what the prologue accomplished for us. We know that the prophet Kashon just reread the prophecy to the king, and he gave an updated translation. We know that the king sends soldiers to the village on the night of the full moon, and now he is sending them the night before, based on Kashon's translation. Also, we met Bradley, and he has a feeling that the linkers need to leave soon. So we have covered number 1 from the shared plot, which was you have a tyrannical ruler or government in charge, and the prophecies tell of the downfall of this ruler or government. The prophecies list a person or people that will bring about the downfall. At this point, we know the story calls these people linkers. We may not know exactly what linkers are yet, but we have that term. And we know that King Damontate has captured or slain all the dragons. But we don't know about the eggs. And like I said, we don't know how to identify the linkers. Who are these people? What do they do? What purpose do they have? Supposedly there's a hope that they exist, but we don't know. You know, we haven't done 2, 3, 4, whatever for the shared plot. Just basically number 1. And when you start your story, you don't have to jump in and do number 1 right away. You can build up to that. You don't have to just go straight for that. You can kind of do normal life or whatever and then kind of build up to that. You don't have to have a prologue. You could. It is all up to you. It's all your choice. This is just a rough draft. This is an example that I'm sharing with you. I hope you are enjoying writing on whichever plot you're writing on, even if it's your own plot and not our shared plot. If you came up with a plot yourself, that would be awesome. Now, join me Tuesday for a writing prompt because we are adding to our scary cave, which has now become a story or the beginning of a story. Join me Friday for chapter 1 on Elloni's Pride, book 1, and the chapter name is Escape. Visit my website, bymckella.com, and read some character bios. Leave a comment on which characters on the website are your favorites so far. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe and the bell so we can continue to write together. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone that would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Michaela with Write with Michaela. Bye for now.